and welcome back to the Pro Tour here at Pro Tour Dominaria in Richmond, Virginia. I'm Tim Willoughby, this is Simon Gertsen, and well, we've got a little bit more magic available for you from our feature match area where we have the #1 ranked player in the world. Let's head down to our feature match area for round 5. Hello and welcome to this round 5 of Pro Tour Dominaria. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Simon Gertsen in our booth here, and we're going to get a chance to see, well, one of the best players in the game. We have Alex Bianchi. He is up against, well, he needs almost no introduction, but we'll give him one. From Team Genesis, it is Seth Manfield, currently #1 ranked player in the world. He's already won a Pro Tour this season, and he's come along with one of the most feared decks in this format. He is on Black-Red Angaro. On the other side of things, Alex Bianchi, we can see a clue there in his land on the first turn. He's on Sultai, and that is essentially Black-Green Constrictor with a very small blue splash. We can see there, Alex, part of Team Ultra Pro, he's on this Sultai Constrictor list, starting with an Ether Hub here. Still no early plays from him, just generating a little bit of energy. The Ether Hub, of course, important. It does mean that he's going to have access to a few other colors of mana as and when needed. On the other side of things, though, Seth Manfield, we know that he's got plenty of experience with the likes of Kari Zev, having done so well with her at Pro Tours past. Fatal Push, though, dealing with the captain before Ragavan the Monkey can come along. And Alex Bianchi here in the early stages of the game against a red deck, and right now for him, he can't be sure exactly what sort of a breed of a red deck. It's just about damage limitation. So Glintsleeve Siphoner coming down here. This one of the creatures that potentially finds itself in a difficult spot in this standard format, because with 1 toughness, we could be seeing a Goblin Chainwhirler killing it for essentially no cost. And there is our first Chainwheeler of the standard phase in the tournament, and it looks like Alex was ready for it. Blossoming Defense, meaning that his Glintsleeve Siphoner survives the Goblin Chainwhirler coming into play, but even having done so, it's a 2-1 up against a 3-3 first striker. I don't even know whether or not that Blossoming Defense was in the long term worth it.
Yeah, this is exactly what we've been talking about all day. The Chainwhirler really warps this metagame.
And Seth Manfield from Team Genesis, he won Pro Tour in Albuquerque 2017. He's just one of the all-time greats of the game. He's just had a fantastic couple of years. He's been a world champion lately and currently #1 ranked player in the world. Getting to just stare down what Alex Bianchi has going on. A Thrashing Bronzedon and Bristling Hydra in hand for Bianchi. Winding Constrictor now in play, which plays very nicely with almost all of the other creatures in his deck. But this Goblin Chainwhirler, as a 3-3 for 3 with First Strike, it can rumble with a lot of the creatures that these black-green decks can throw down without too much of a worry. More of a worry for Seth is what's going on in his hand. He has largely lands to work with. Rekindling Phoenix is certainly an exciting addition, and one that has gradually seen more and more favor, kind of edging out many of the Hazarets that previously we might have seen from red decks. Scrap Heap Scrounger as well, another source of consistent damage that is difficult for opponents to interact with in more traditional ways.
Upkeep, I'm going to pay 2 energy and a life, go to 3 energy, 14 life.
Alex Bianchi drawing additional cards where he can here with these Glintsleeve Siphoners. This is the reason to keep that Siphoner alive in the place of everything that Seth Manfield has going on. I can see that our advantage bar, it's already moved a few times in the course of this game. Talk us through the reasoning for that, Simon.
So what we saw was a Goblin Chainwhirler doing what Goblin Chainwhirler does, dealing 1 damage to Glintsleeve Siphoner, but Alex had the right response, and even though it cost him a card, that these cards he's now getting back with Glintsleeve Siphoner's ability. And at the same time, Winding Constrictor is doing its job really, really beautifully as well. Now, for those who have been following Standard over the last few months, this is a deck that really gets out of control really, really fast.
Bristling Hydra now coming down, and enough energy to work with that Alex Bianchi can feel like his Hydra is comparatively safe here. With Winding Constrictor along for the party, it does mean that each and every time that 3 energy gets spent, that Winding Constrictor getting a couple of counters, and very rapidly it will be the largest creature on this battlefield. As things stand, there's just the one flyer on the battlefield. That is on Seth Manfield's side of things. This red-black deck, it gradually just gets to make life very difficult. Those Jane Whirlers, even on defense, can be particularly problematic. And the second one, 6 power of first strike is enough to give even the biggest of creatures pause. Alex Bianchi, he's got no responses to the second Goblin Chain Whirler. And this time round, he will have to look on as his Glint Sleeve Siphoner goes to the graveyard. Takes an extra point himself. And it, of course, does mean that if the first Goblin Chain Whirler were to attack this turn, it's already looking at a bunch of creatures that have taken a point of damage.
Yeah, quite unlikely, though. Bristling Hydra is just a roadblock.
So as things stand, Rekindling Phoenix is the one that's doing the damage for Seth Manfield thus far. And here comes Scrap Heap Scrounger as a follow-up. The Scrap Heap Scrounger, such a potent way of making sure that you don't run out of gas if you are one of these largely red decks. On the other side of things, Bianchi, I do believe that he's got access to Verdurous Gearhulk here alongside Winding Constrictor. And with that Servant of the Conduit, he can even play second Winding Constrictor before Verdurous Gearhulk and start throwing around an awful lot of counters here.
But he doesn't have anything to stop flyers. So I think that's the main issue. He has 16 life on Manfield's side is so much. And when you're on 9 facing off a Phoenix, that's kind of scary.
Snakes all around for Alex Bianchi here. He just needs to figure out what to do with the rest of his mana. So Goblin Chain Whirler jumping in the way of this Bristling Hydra. That does mean that Bianchi forced to make a decision as to where he wants to put counters. 3 energy to put 3 counters on a Bristling Hydra. That's a very exciting rate indeed. Those 2 copies of Winding Constrictor really doing work there to make sure that Alex Bianchi in a great shape with his gigantic Hydra at this point.
Yeah, and a very smart play by Seth as well, who did immediately block. This is not about card advantage. This is just about preserving your life total so that Alex doesn't have a 2-turn clock to put on you.
And there's a Brontodon coming down. Yes, in principle, it can deal with that Scrap Heap Scrounger, but it's also just a really large body. And that's one of the reasons that Alex Bianchi feels like he can be playing it in the main deck without any great concern. This is a format where there are still plenty of targets. Kaladesh still in the mix. There are obviously plenty of great artifacts from there. But, I mean, even the likes of a Construct from Khan can sometimes be something that you're going to need to send that dinosaur to kill off. Cycle here from Seth Manfield as he tries to improve the quality of his hand. But he's drawn an awful lot of lands this game, it must be said. And ultimately, he's been leaning on the Phoenix quite a bit. But we can see that the Phoenix on its own might struggle with the amount of threats that Alex Bianchi has going on now.
Yeah, and this is really, really interesting. It might come down to whether Seth can find a way to deal 1 point of damage to Alex Bianchi, who currently doesn't look like he will be able to win next turn. If he does, of course, then Seth has no outs. But if Alex needs 2 turns to win here, then Seth can draw a Chandra or a Burn Spell to finish things off.
Now, if you're on Seth's side of the battlefield, while you may suspect that there's a Verdurous Gearhulk coming, you can't know that for sure. If there is a Verdurous Gearhulk coming, which we know is actually, in fact, sat in Alex Bianchi's hand, that represents just an absurd amount of counters thanks to the copies of Winding Constrictor already on the battlefield. Distributing 4+1/+1 counters, as long as you're sending those 4 counters in 4 different directions, each of those counters ends up turning into 3+1/+1 counters. So that's 12 additional power that the Verdurous Gearhulk represents on the battlefield with haste, and then the Verdurous Gearhulk itself, which is another 4. I mean, it's definitely possible that Seth Manfield could be facing lethal this next turn.
If Seth attacks with the Phoenix here, he would actually be dead, because even if Chain Whirler chump blocks the Hydra, the total power on his battlefield is 9, plus the 12 that you just said. That would be 21 damage out of, well, almost nowhere.
So as things stand here, Alex, he needs to be a little bit careful just about what he's doing. There's a lot of mana left open from Seth Manfield. He's got plenty of cards in hand. We've not seen any, for example, copies of Unlicensed Disintegration thus far from Seth Manfield. And on 9 life, the 3 points of damage that Unlicensed Disintegration represents, certainly a scary prospect. But Alex, I guess, under the gun. He knows that he needs to do something big this turn, and there are few things as big as a Virgio Gearhulk here. He lines up a whole bunch of dice. This is the neat way of showing exactly where you're going to put the counters. You put the counters next to the creatures, showing the targets for your trigger, and then your opponent has the chance to do things before they resolve.
Target 1/1/1/1.
1 on every creature apart from the already gigantic Bristling Hydra here, and each of those 1 counters magically transforming into 3 counters thanks to those 2 copies of Winding Constrictor on the battlefield, and that means that we have quite the force heading into the red zone here. Now, is there a way that Seth can get a big alpha strike here?
So first, Seth has to survive. The Hydra and the Brontodon have to be blocked, and then it's 10... 15 damage. Can he survive on 1 life? Beautiful.
Damage. Yep. So we take 15, go to 1. Yeah.
1 point of life to work with. There's an egg, thanks to the Phoenix being briefly dealt with.
Yeah, I'm afraid there's nothing in Seth's deck to get him out of this. I was thinking of Unlicensed Disintegration, but it would have been enough because Threshing Brontodon was still available to deal with Scrappy Scrounger. So I think Seth did a good job making a game out of it, but ultimately he was 1 turn too slow.
Well, he'll have to see whether or not he can speed things up a little bit. I mean, he's already the aggro deck, so there's potential there. We will find out how his match, and indeed all the other matches going on after these messages.
Always know the right play to make? Show off your skills at a local preliminary Pro Tour qualifier. With over 2,000 game stores worldwide running PPTQs, find an event near you at magic.wizards.com/PPTQ.
Hello and welcome back to this round 5 here at Pro Tour Dominaria in Richmond, Virginia. You can see that our main match just shuffling up, and we're going to get a chance to find out how our other matches are going from down on the floor with Marshall Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Tim. So, to my left here, we have Lucas Esperbertu playing against Gregor Kowalski. Now, first game went to Lucas, so he's up a game there as they work their way into game number 2. Behind me is kind of an interesting one. This is Jack Kieffer from the United States. He's playing against, that's right, yellow hat there, Gabrielle Nassif. The thing is, this is the 4th former player of the year that he's had to play in his first 5 rounds for Jack. And he's actually done really well. He's 3-1 coming into the round, but as it stands, he is down a game to Gabriel. And on my right here, we have blue-black in the hands of Erik Froelich playing against Atsuki Kahara. Now, Kahara won the first game pretty handily. He had 7 cards in hand, and Erik scooped him up. So they're heading into game number 2 as well.
Lovely stuff. Thank you for that, Marshall. Really interesting to hear about the different paths that people have chosen to travel to be able to navigate their way through this standard format, and we will get a chance to hopefully see a little bit of some of those games and indeed our main match soon enough. It looks like our players on the main table just shuffling up, making sure that they've got everything in preparation following the sideboarding. A little bit of spot adjustments maybe as they're trying to figure out what best to do in this relatively well-defined matchup.
Yeah, a lot more well-defined than previous rounds where we had some off-the-walls decks, and now we are back to, you know what you want to beat, you know how you want to beat it. I think Seth actually made a really nice deck choice for this tournament. It's nothing fancy, nothing spectacular, but it's a deck that is true and tried and true. You can't really go wrong with the 4 Chain Whirlers, powerful Planeswalkers, and Bombard Courier card I really like.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that there's 2 different approaches even within the black-red archetype, whether or not you want to go low to the ground with your Bomat Couriers and your cheaper creatures, or whether or not you maybe want to lean on the power level as some of the more expensive cards available, max out on Planeswalkers and go in that direction. It looks like Seth has gone for the more aggressive of the 2 options, and I guess that could be a concession to the fact that there are control decks in the room. It could mean that you can kind of steal away games that you might otherwise not be able to get that damage in early. I guess that we will find out how the dust settles by the end of Sunday when someone's picking up a trophy. As things stand here, Canyon Slough coming down for Seth Manfield, the #1 ranked player in the world from Team Genesis, who will have to win 2 games on the trot if he's going to be able to get things going here. Alex Bianchi just figuring out where he wants to go with his first land. When you've got these lands that come into play tapped early doors, it does make your life a little bit more interesting in terms of sequencing. There are plenty of 1-drops available to the Sultai Constrictor deck if it wants them. Scrap Heap Scrounger now coming down for Seth Manfield, though, who does have, between Abrade and Chandra Torch of Defiance, it seems like his deck's maybe a little bit more mid-range than we saw in Game 1.
Yeah, and he has a really nice curve as well. Uncrop Crasher into Chandra. If he has all these untapped lands, I think he does. That could be quite the blowout.
Yeah, the Uncrop Crasher, it's a card that, in some respects, has taken a little bit of a backseat because Chainwhirler suddenly has become the 3-drop of choice for many decks. But you know what? That haste is still very relevant. In this instance, not even needing to exert to be able to get rid of a key blocker, that meaning there's still the potential for that in the future. Alex Bianchi, he can be looking on at whatever creatures he has in hand and know that he might still be taking another 6 damage on this next set of attacks. Sticky wicket here for Alex Bianchi. He's looking on at the 2 copies of Walking Ballista in hand. Rishkar Pima Renegade. Walking Ballista, if it's a 1-1, is just asking to get killed off by Goblin Chainwhirler. And Rishkar, as the first creature that you play, is not nearly as exciting as it might be later on. Does go with Rishkar, though. The 3-3 at least forces the Uncrop Crasher to do something rather than potentially seeing things go horribly wrong with a Goblin Chainwhirler. As things stand, though, I don't think that Alex is going to be too happy with the quality of Seth's draw here. In these early turns, 3-power guy on turn 2, 3-power 3 guy on turn 3, and now with 4 mana available, Seth Manfield, he has a whole bunch of options available to him.
One of them being Chandra, kill your Rishkar. Don't forget that Seth is an expert on Sultai Constrictor, Sultai Energy if you want himself. So he kind of knows the ins and out of Alex Bianchi's deck just as well as he knows his own.
Yeah, truly sort of the definition of professional level Magic is you've got experience with all of the key decks in the format. You can make decisions based on really putting yourself in the seat of your opponent in addition to working with the cards that you've drawn. Throws down that Chandra Torture of Defiance. 1 loyalty is a relatively safe amount of loyalty in this particular matchup, and the damage keeping on coming through. No need to exert here for that Uncrop Crasher still, and Alex Bianchi, he's going to have to do something very special indeed if he's going to get back in this game. The advantage very well and truly swinging towards Seth Manfield, who's doing exactly what he needed to after having had kind of a rough game 1.
If Bianchi plays a single creature, then Seth actually has lethal here with +1 of Chandra and the Exert on Uncrop Crusher.
Yeah, that kind of an on-board kill. So Alex Bianchi knew exactly what he had to achieve. He's found a way of stringing that together with, he's got the Walking Ballista that he can shoot down Chandra. And it gets to even stay alive thanks to the additional counter it got from that Winding Constrictor. As it stands, though, we have got a follow-up here from Seth Manfield. There is now a 1/1 creature on the other side of the battlefield. Goblin Chain Whirler will not hesitate to deal with that one. 1 point of damage getting thrown somewhere by Alex Bianchi in response to that Chain Whirler. But there's still more from Seth Manfield. He's got the Abrade, he swings through, and Alex Bianchi on just a single point of life here. 19 points on the other side than for Seth Manfield. It feels like we're going to get a game 3 very swiftly indeed. So 4 mana here. Walking Ballista once more coming down for Alex Bianchi. He is going to be able to, at least in principle, do something on this board here, but finally the Exert coming from that Uncrop Crasher. It was a long time coming, but you know what? When it happened, it was enough to close things out. So we now do have a game 3 going on our main table, and we're going to get a chance to, while these guys are figuring out the detail of their sideboarding, shuffling up and so on, we're going to get to jump back and see Yellow Hat in action. Gabrielle Nassif, he's up against Jack Kieffer. We have Jeskai Control against Mono Black Control. So the life totals here, 8 to 20 in favor of Mono Black, but Glorybringer on the battlefield alongside Teferi. The Khan on Jack Kieffer's side of things not doing a whole lot thanks to Sorcerer's Spyglass. And what that means is that even though Gabrielle Nassif's life total is on the low side, he may actually be able to get back in this one here. Jack Kieffer looks like he's pumping the brakes at this point. Not very many cards left in hand, and with Nassif with a Planeswalker on the battlefield active and indeed Search for Azcanta going on as well, in addition to cards in hand, while he might prefer to have a little bit more life to work with, this is actually not a bad position for the control deck. Sorry, the Jeskai control deck at all.
Yeah, this actually looks like a really, really powerful board for Gabriel. There's Sorcerer's Spyglass, shutting down Karn. He has the stronger creatures, the better Planeswalkers, and a Search for Azcanta on the battlefield.
Yeah, Dreadshade getting disallowed there. We do not want to see that particular monster with all of those swamps to support it.
Another Mono Black player, a completely different list, but Mono Black seems to be more popular than I anticipated.
Yeah, there are a lot of tools for Mono Black right now. It's got the potential to work with a discard plan. It will always have access to good quality removal, and then in terms of creatures, that's really the place where I see the key difference. How many creatures do you want to be committing to the battlefield, and how early? Is it more about trying to get control of the board, or is it getting in a little bit of early damage and then just sort of cleaning up? We've even seen Torment of Hailfire in previous Mono Black lists in this standard format. Be very intrigued to see if we see any of that at the Pro Tour.
So now Magma Spray took out a Scrounger. Gabriel flipped Azcanta. He will untap it with Teferi most likely. I think this is going to a game 3.
Yeah, it's amazing how this is one of the best examples of why just looking at the life totals isn't enough to give you the full story on a game of Magic. Yes, there's cards in play for Gabriel that means he's a little bit ahead in terms of the board, but with Nassif up a game, he could close things out very, very quickly here.
Also, this is exactly where Gabrielle Nassif wants to be, drawing about 3 cards a turn. Or more, 5.
Why not? What's better than drawing 3 cards a turn? I think we figured it out. And Gabrielle Nassif, he's been playing variations on this sort of control deck for much of his Magic playing career, which is longer than most of the people on this Pro Tour. The French Hall of Famer is well known for his ability with blue cards, and here just demonstrating that. And I really like seeing the pace of play that Gabrielle Nassif is working at here. He's known as potentially on occasion being kind of a deliberate player, but you know what? This is the kind of deck that if you're playing it too slowly, too consistently, it does mean that you're going to pick up draws, you're going to pick up losses, which might otherwise have been wins. And you can see here that the pace that Gabrielle is playing at is exactly what you need to be able to make sure that you are consistently picking up those wins and able to string together the good record.
You can see how he's racing himself, playing at a speed that he's almost losing track of what's going on.
Kieffer, at just 16 years of age, it may well be that Gabrielle has been playing this kind of deck for longer than Kieffer has been alive.
Playing blue-white control since 1993?
Maybe not 93. Gabrielle Nassif, it took him a little while to get onto the Pro Tour, not because he wasn't talented enough, but just because he started playing pretty young and getting permission to fly all over the world from his folks. A little bit tricky, but once he got there, immediately made an impact. And there we see Gabrielle Nassif getting the handshake from Jack Kieffer. And that means that we have timed things kind of nicely to head back to our front table just around the time that we're seeing opening hands being drawn by Alex Bianchi and Seth Manfield. Still in game 2 for the matchup between Atsuki Kihara and Erik Froelich, so we may get a chance to jump in on that at some point, depending on whether or not Seth Manfield gets the kind of draw in game 3 that he got in game 2.
Yeah, let's see about that. He's also on the draw for game 3, so that is quite a bit different.
Sounds like we also might have a mulligan somewhere within the mix there. Can't always rely on 7, but with the scry after a mulligan, it does mean that you're not completely dead in the water on 6, as Alex Bianchi, he's kind of looking on in his hand. Does he want to keep that 7? It looks like maybe just good enough. The difference being on the play, seeing your opponent go down to 6. Some of those marginal hands that end up looking just a little bit nicer.
What you really want to see is, of course, Winding Constrictor, the centerpiece of the deck. But there are a lot of good hands that you cannot just mulligan because they don't have Winding Constrictor. That would be too risky. You would end up with bad hands too often. Definitely an interesting, dynamic matchup, but we can see these games which are a little bit one-sided, because if one person gets to do what they want to do, then it's kind of easy for them to steamroll the opponent.
All right, so we got to make some lands and spells here. That like a kind of first step. 2 copies of Karizev, a little awkward if you assume that the first one's going to survive. If the first one dies, then having a second one not too shabby at all.
I like this hand simply because it has exactly the 2 mana that Seth needs to cast his removal and his creatures. So it's really difficult for him to flood out.
So 7th the Conduit coming down and barely touching the battlefield before Magma Spray killing off the 2/2 mana producer. The energy, of course, still being generated by Seth Manfield.
It looked like Seth drew a 3rd Karizev.
The 3rd Karizev I'm a little shakier on. Hazaret the Fervent is in hand for Manfield. We know that he's done good work with that one in the past. And he's got removal for the first few threats that Alex Bianchi able to get down. Bianchi's deck, even though it does have the potential to have big individual creatures, it's more of a synergy deck, so if you can kind of kill each creature off one by one, it can struggle to get things going in the early doors.
Exactly. You have this key card Winding Constrictor, so for Seth, he can be super happy that it didn't come down on turn 2, and he's holding a removal spell for it. So Alex's situation is not the best.
Yeah, in spite of that mulligan, it seems like Seth Manfield just has the right tools for the job here in our game 3. Ragavan the Monkey briefly dropping in to do a bit of damage to Alex Bianchi, dropping to 17 on that attack.
But all of this could turn around. If Seth is stuck there with just Karizevs and some removal spells, then Alex certainly has other tools to get out of this.
Yeah, Rishkarpima Renegade, a nice addition when you've got a Walking Ballista on the battlefield anyway. And between Blossoming Defense and Bristling Hydra, he actually has a really good collection of cards for being able to fight a lot of what this red-black deck has going on. He can potentially make it so that his key threats are going to be difficult to be dealt with by the removal in Seth Manfield's hand, and some of those threats are pretty sizable before you even worry about pump spells. these guys. They got over 20 minutes on the clock, so they're, after that incredibly fast game 2, able to kind of play in the space a little bit, make sure that they don't make any mistakes. And with Rich Carpima Renegade's ability on the stack, we see an abrade here coming from Seth Manfield.
And the Rishka is on the battlefield, and the Walking Ballista already has a counter. So if Alex wants to, he can actually make a mana with Walking Ballista here.
That would be the most energy efficient way of casting a Blossoming Defense here. I think I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. Why spend an energy with Ether Hub if you can tap your artifact creature?
Alex Bianchi just thinking through his options. That Blossoming Defense is a pretty premium card in this matchup.
That's it. 2 energy.
As a gentle reminder to both of you, we want to keep the pace of the game up.
And ultimately, it is some energy being spent there. This way round, it means that there's the potential for Walking Ballista to actually get stuck in this turn.
No, or just have it available as a blocker. Both very reasonable.
Yep.
Also, I think Alex is not relying on energy very much. His mana looks great, and he doesn't have anything to spend the energy on. Okay, Bristling Hydra, but that comes with its own supply.
Hadana's Climb is kind of the one main deck, at least, reason for blue mana in the Sultai Constrictor list. As we see Hazoret the Fervent coming down for Seth Manfield here. It's still 2 cards in hand, so not doing too much just yet. Hadana's Climb, what are the, sort of the key moments where it really shines for this deck?
I think the best situation that you can find yourself in is if you combine it with Bristling Hydra, because you know there's nothing your opponent can do about it, and then suddenly you are threatening these, let's say, 2-turn swings. Not quite like blue-green Pummeler, but it does go in that direction.
So now that we see Seth with his copy of Hazoret the Fervent in play, Alex Bianchi, he does need to give a little bit of a pause to figure out quite how much damage he could potentially be facing next turn, because 5 damage coming through from that Hazoret is going to be something he can't afford to take too terribly often. He doesn't know that there's 2 copies of Karizev in hand, which means that it's going to be a little bit tricky for Seth Manfield to get down to just the 1 card in hand.
Yeah, but I mean, Seth knows he can get down to 1 card. The problem is more that he doesn't really want to just spend his mana casting 2 Karizevs.
Well, it looks like we're going to get a Hadana's Climb here. The enchantment, a card that we've not necessarily seen tons of in Standard, but when it shows up, it does do a lot of work. So at the beginning of your combat, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There are a few good targets for that right now, and then at some point, if a creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you can transform Hadana's Climb. And the flip side of Hadana's Climb, pretty impressive about actually being able to force through damage. Immediately getting to transform Hadana's Climb there, as the Walking Ballista already had a fair amount of counters available on it.
Yep, clearly with a plan here. Not interested in the recurring advantage of Hadana's Climb, but rather wants to flip it as soon as possible.
So Bristling Hydra coming down now for Alex Bianchi. The life total is 17 each. The early damage that was dealt by Seth Manfield in Game 2 simply does not materialize in this Game 3. And that means that Alex Bianchi has been able to get a few things going. Manfield on a mulligan to 6. He had some removal for the early creatures, but he now finds himself that his creatures are simply a little bit smaller than what's going on the other side of things. And Karizev getting Karizev'd a little bit just to get down on cards in hand. Not ideal for the #1 ranked player in the world here, as he looks on, sees Winged Temple Orazka on the other side of the battlefield, just making sure that he understands quite how large it could make that Bristling Hydra next turn.
No, it could get in for 8 next turn, and that's almost a guaranteed lethal the turn after. There's still a Walking Ballista, of course, on Bianchi's side. And that's completely ignoring the activated ability of the Hydra itself.
Yeah, I mean, 17 life, it doesn't seem too likely that Seth Manfield's actually dead this turn, but he could be very, very close indeed. Big attacks coming in from Seth, and the Bristling Hydra electing to jump in the way of Ragavan, that kind of the safest of the creatures to block. At some point, Bristling Hydra, even against the likes of Hazaret, it does have the potential to grow big enough to just simply be able to block the god. And yet another copy of Karizev coming down, effectively untapping Karizev in play. Legend rule meaning you can only keep one copy of that captain in play at a time. The Skyship Raider with the most expensive form of vigilance.
I think Bianchi is already counting if he might have lethal this turn.
9. Yeah.
You can see that one of his ground creatures will get through. So that's 3 damage, putting Seth on 14. Then if he gives the Hydra flying and pumps it with Winged Temple of Oraska, and he invests the energy, that's a lot of damage. 10, 13. I think he's 1 short, and if he had 1 more energy, he would have lethal here.
Now, the difficulty, of course, being 1 short is it's not inconceivable whatsoever that Seth Manfield could find 9 damage on his turn on the return swings here.
It feels a bit risky, doesn't it?
A little bit.
8, 9, 10, 11.
Getting 7 damage is very straightforward. Any card that Seth Manfield draws will be able to achieve that. It's whether or not he can get up to the full 9 here.
6 energy.
Now, with an Ether Hub in hand to make additional energy, I think that Alex Bianchi might have been able to go for lethal there. I guess that he was maybe a little concerned about what Seth has going on. But equally, if he's determined that finding 4 extra damage is a bridge too far, then this is probably the safer way of doing things.
It is, but you are right. He did make lethal there. He had 2 counters on the Hydra, which is 4 extra damage, and then he had the additional damage on the Walking Ballista.
And Seth Manfield just has to draw and pass here.
Activate. Combat.
One of the safer swings that could come along, and a big handshake from Alex Bianchi there. Very happy to take down the #1 ranked player in the world, Seth Manfield, picking up the win. So Alex is now on 5-0. A big deal for him, and we have just the 1 match left in our feature match area. I can see a few judges here just making sure that the game is going appropriately. The matchup that we have between Atsuki Kihara and Erik Froelich is Esper Control on one side of the table and blue-black mid-range on the other side of things. So these guys are just figuring out the details of a relatively complex ruling. It seems an awkward sort of time for us to jump in partway through. But one thing that we are going to be able to get is just getting an update as to what's going on from Marshall down on the floor here from our feature match area.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So Marshall, what can you tell us about what's happening down in our feature match area right now?
All right, so we have a little bit of a complicated judge ruling, although it's not terrible. It was complicated a little further by language barriers for Atsuki Kihara, but we've got that sorted out. So basically what happened is Atsuki, he had the Scarab God on his turn with 2 zombies, but he scryed 2, but forgot to mention the life total change. He passed the turn back. Erik went to his turn. He drew an extra card from the Siphoner, which of course loses him a life. Then he put a spell on the stack, and then Atsuki said, hey, the life totals aren't right. You should be at 2 lower. So they needed to bring a judge in to make sure that they could clear up exactly what happened and what they could back up, because Erik might have made a different decision. You know, if he knew his life total was lower, he might not want to exchange one of those life for a card. So they're just making sure that everything's on the up and up right now. They're having a little judge meeting at the back, and they'll get it back underway as soon as they can. Yeah,
we always used to refer to that level, that number of judges all in one place, as being a zebra pack of judges. Right now, it's just 3 black shirts and a red shirt there. We do have 1 dedicated head judge, level judge in our feature match area at all times, which means that we are able to deal with these sorts of situations just a little bit easier. And it looks like Guillaume is actually just heading back down to our players to make sure that they get the appropriate ruling on this.
Discrepancy is very relevant in this situation,
and you have a couple of opportunities to notice that your opponent was not at the correct life total. I'm going to let the game as it is right now. You had the opportunity to stop your opponent when he say, I'm taking 2 from this and go to 9. The fact that you had time to take action after that, let me think you react too late on this.
彼の判決は今変わりました。じゃあさっきのライフの差別が今の状況にとしてとても重要なので。In that case, the game is in the exact same spot, so then I know exactly what I'm doing. ライフが間違った。
Yeah, conveniently, even though there's been a bit of a break as they figure out the details. At this point, I would guess that Erik going to play pretty quickly because he's been looking at that hand of cards and he's got a fair idea of what comes next here. We'll find out exactly what the life totals are soon enough. They'll go up on our screen just once this ruling is completed. Obviously, very important to make sure that it is the correct life totals on both sides, and ultimately, that's where all this came from.
The consequences of the third one. And Erik, you received 1 for failure to maintain game state. I mean, he had the time to do the stride.
I didn't notice his stride, obviously. Yes, you're right.
How much time is this? 7 minutes. Okay.
So we'll get a little bit of extra time on our clock here, which means we're of course going to get a little bit of extra magic to watch. We will hopefully be able to get to the end of this game without any more interruption. And
is now 9 to 19, and we have 19.
so the life totals, by the sounds of it, Atsuki pretty much on an unblemished life total. Meanwhile, Erik Froelich, as we head down to our table now, is somewhat low on his life total, shall we say. And we get a chance to see a little bit of blue-black mid-range versus Esper control. So black mana being added to blue here. Scarab God, a very key component in how this matchup's going to play. And it looks like a champion of wits being brought back thanks to the Scarab God for some big card drawing here from Erik Froelich. 9 life for the face-to-face games player, currently on 4-0. Atsuki Kihara also on 4-0 on Esper control, so he potentially has access to Teferi in addition to the Scarab God. There's just some really potent control cards available in this standard format if you want to go in that direction.
17 in my pan.
And as we know, in these kind of matchups, the person with an active Scarab God is usually heavily favored. On the other hand, these 4 Menace Siphoners are really putting pressure on Erik.
Yeah, the Menace are really a key ability that's not something that always ends up kicking in too heavily, but once it's a 4/4 creature, having to double block it, it's almost certainly going to be able to kill off something here. The Scarab God on its own would not be enough to be able to block one of these Siphoners, and as things stand, they may be enough to just give Kihara the win here, in addition to, of course, the life total advantages that he's working with. Now, it looks like Atsuki Kihara has a fair amount of different win conditions. One of the things that we're going to be talking about a lot this weekend when it comes to these control decks is quite how many win conditions they're running. In classic blue-white, there are some that we've even referred to as unconditional control that just have Teferi to work with. Between the likes of these Glint Sleeve Siphoners, this Torrential Gearhulk, lots of different ways of dealing with opponents, while at the same time dealing with all of the cards that they've got working. And here we see Torrential Gearhulk allowing a Vraska's Contempt to take out that Scarab God, and that a big deal in terms of engineering an outcome in this game.
Yeah, this is actually huge. You can see that Erik is suddenly without a Scarab God and down to 1 life.
And with Kihara on 18 life, already a game up, he's got very little work left to do in order to be able to close this one out. 2 Menace creatures on the battlefield, in addition to that Torrential Gearhulk, in addition to a Scarab God. The Scarab God on its own representing lethal damage here before we worry about anything else. And this kind of desperation champion of wits here coming from Erik Froelich, desperately trying to find some way of staying in this game for even 1 more turn, potentially able to string together a 5th win. But no, there's the handshake. Atsuki Kihara picking up the win there. Big win for him, and he will be continuing the unbeaten run. Undefeated in draft, now 5-0 in total here in Richmond, Virginia. And it's been, well, thick and fast magic in our feature match area. Seth Manfield's red-black aggro not quite able to get everything going. Alex Bianchi doing things there. And I'm really intrigued to see where things actually fall out in terms of these decks. We've seen a lot of different decks in the feature match area. You can do aggro, you can do control. Mid-range, very definitely a real player in this format. And that means that we've got players that have had a little bit more time to test than normal in Standard. And they've even got decks in all of the main archetypes that you could potentially be looking to play in Magic. Everyone's got a good deck to work with. It's just a matter of who's going to win with them. More Magic for you soon, and indeed more updates from the desk after these messages.
We went to our first convention, and that was my first game convention I ever went to. I started playing over the summer, and it was just me and my then boyfriend, now husband. We spent a bunch of time then getting together with like groups of like 10 to 20 people in these huge multiplayer games, and there were just people everywhere playing Magic. We kind of looked at each other and went, okay, do we really want to do this? And then we said yes, and that was it.
So here we are closing in on the end of round 5 of Pro Tour Dominaria. We saw Kenji Egashira, a first-time Pro Tour player, in the feature match area. And we've also seen Sean Sabia do the same. He's in his first Pro Tour. Now, I know he was 3-0 in draft, but I kind of lost track since then. So, Brian David Marshall, what are the Sabia metrics?
I can't believe you did that, Rich. You threatened to, but you made the joke. I'm here with Sean Sabia from Poughkeepsie, New York. Sean, this is your first Pro Tour. How long have you been waiting to get here?
I restarted about 6 years ago, so probably since then.
Just PTQs, GPs, everything?
Yeah, that. I obviously played in several Opens, stuff like that, but yeah.
And then how did you ultimately qualify to play here at Pro Tour Dominaria?
I got 10th at GP Hartford, playing Breach.
Okay, so that was a modern GP. How do you feel about standard in general? Are you more of a modern guy?
Yeah, I'm more modern and legacy if possible. The standard setup for this is actually starting to get a little sweet again. The last time I really played was Theros into, I think, Cons. So
now tell me about, everyone has these huge playtest teams for these Pro Tours. What was your huge playtest team for this Pro Tour?
My test group was basically just my group of friends. I basically just jammed with several people. I was originally testing for Burn with Flame of the Kell because I wanted to make that card good, and then at the last second realized I was getting hosed by the bigger aggressive mono red, so I kind of audibled at 10:30 at night to mono black, and here we are.
It's looking pretty sweet. So you went 3-0 in your draft, which is pretty exciting to do, especially as a first-time player on the Pro Tour. Tell us about your draft strategy.
So the first thing I did when I opened my pack is I took a look at it, and the first thing I normally do is I look at the removal, because that's me. I'm playing mono black. I kill everything. So I took Blessed Light first, and then I got sent 2 of the Journey Mage, the bounce.
Academy Journey Mage?
Yeah, I got past 1, took that, got another one, took that, and just went blue-white, and there you go.
That sounds great. That's got to feel wonderful to get that under your belt here early on. Now, when you were in the feature match in round 4, that was pretty exciting. But I know you were trying to slip some messages to some friends at home who might be watching. Anybody you want to say hello to home?
Yeah, I just want to say hi to everyone at Champion Paintball. It's in Red Oaks Mill, and where I'm from in New York. And hi, Rob, Frodo. What's up? And everybody else, Nate and Jakura, thank you for helping me with the deck.
Awesome. All right, well, you're 4-1 right now. You are through to day 2, so congratulations and good luck the rest of the way here at Pro Tour Dominaria.
Thank you very much.
Great stuff to see someone in their first PT getting to 4-1. And again, the path just isn't easy. Saw Jack Kieffer in the feature match here against Gabrielle Nassif. 4 out of 5 are former players of the year. His run through day 1 of Pro Tour Dominaria. Well, it's Deck Tech time once again. Maria Bartholdi is waiting for us at the video wall, and she is there with a man no stranger to success, or indeed to Deck Tech's Mark Tobiash.